Okay, we have a couple of minutes, but maybe I'll start with some housekeeping items, and then by the time I'm done with that, I'll be able to hand the floor over. So I'm just going to start with the land acknowledgement for Athabasca University. Athabasca University respectfully acknowledges that we are on and work on the traditional lands of the Indigenous people, Inuit, First Nations, and Métis of Canada. We honor the ancestry, heritage, and gifts of the Indigenous people, and we give thanks to them. So thank you everyone for joining us today. This is part of our 4-part series on developing your research. We host the series yearly, and this session is specifically geared towards literature reviews. So just so everyone is aware, this is being recorded and it will be available on the library website after. It takes a little bit of time for it to be posted, but it is available on the library website, YouTube page, sorry, and Joanna is going to throw a link to that in the chat later on, so everyone has access to it. I believe everyone was sent the materials for today. It would have been sent in an email a couple of hours ago, but if you are missing those, please just reach out and I can forward them along to you. Again, the recording is happening, so just be aware of that. And please just be advised that we have quite a few people joining us today, and just to kind of alleviate some background noise, we're just muting mics and keeping cameras off for now. But if it comes time to the question period and you would like to use your camera and mic, please just raise your hand and I'll give you access to that. Otherwise, you can always use the chat box as well, and Joanna and Sarah Jean can monitor that as we go through. So welcome to all of our graduate students, undergrad students, and our guests from Memorial University. Thank you for joining us today. And that's it for kind of housekeeping stuff. And I'm going to hand the floor over to Joanna. I think, are you starting, Joanna? Okay, go ahead. Thank you so much.
Okay, hi everyone. Welcome to our session on literature reviews. My name is Joanna Nemeth, and I am the Managing Librarian of Information Services, almost said my old title. So I help with all the public service work at the library, including helping you with your research questions. And I'll let Sarah Jean introduce herself.
Thanks, Joanna. Thanks, Crystal. Welcome, everybody. I'm Sarah Jean Watt, the coordinator of the Write Site, AU's online writing center. I'm going to just let you know a little bit about using Teams. If you would like to turn on live captions, you can do that under the More button. It has 3 dots on it. And then scroll down and click Language and Speech and turn on live captions. And if you'd like to mute the chat notifications, then also under More, choose Settings and then Mute Notifications or Don't Show Chat Bubbles. And I'll put those instructions in the chat as well. We also have a mini course that is a companion to this webinar. It's linked to on the handout that Crystal has sent you, and Joanna also just put it in the chat. So you can check that out right now or later if you like.
Okay, and I'll go ahead and start off with our workshop objectives. Also, we were going to say during the session, feel free to add your questions while we're going. We might not respond to the longer ones, but if it's just kind of like a double checking something and relevant, we'll try and respond to those during the session. Otherwise, we'll kind of save most of the questions for the end, but feel free to throw them in and remind us to check them at the end. All right, so our workshop objectives. So our goal for today is to provide you with an array of patterns, strategies, and resources to help you approach every aspect of writing the literature review. I'll start off with the purpose of a literature review, then we'll talk about the different forms they take and their function. We'll shift into the preparation and process for searching and talk about when to stop looking. That's always a question I get, so it's a good one to have in here. Sarah Jean will take us through the structure of a literature review, and then we'll talk about how to find samples. So we've already added a link to this, but most of what we're talking about is covered in this, basically a short asynchronous course, or you can call it a literature review guide. So anytime you need to refer back to something, it should be listed in there. And the link is in the chat. And yeah, it's free, so everyone at any institution can use it. All right, so first, what is a literature review? Literature reviews provide an overview of relevant sources you explored while researching a particular topic and are designed to demonstrate to your readers how your research fits within a larger field of study. If we think about scholarly research as discourse or conversation, a literature review can be thought of as capturing the parts of the conversation that are relevant to your topic and setting the scene for your research. So a literature review consists of a summary and synthesis. Summaries capture the important information from the source, and the synthesis frames the research problem within the current research and informs how you intend to investigate the problem. So the analytical features of a literature review might capture the state of the research, discuss works in context of their contributions to the area of research, identify relationships between works, identify thematic or conceptual divisions in the research, such as key schools of thought or key debates, positions on an argument. They can present a chronological progression of the research on a topic, and they can reinterpret older material or merge old and new interpretations. So the key features of a literature review: identify where gaps exist within the current field of research and locate your research within the context of existing literature. So where does your paper fit in and why is it important? All right, so literature reviews come in many forms and have many possible functions. They can appear within academic papers, where they frame the current study or paper. We also find reviews in theses and dissertations, where they come as a chapter usually, that kind of answers the why this topic, why this approach question. We also see literature reviews as standalone papers. So I was curious if any of you are working on literature reviews or getting started with the process. What form of literature review are you working on? And we'll see if this goes live, but you can kind of choose here if you want to go with I'm not working on one, it's part of a paper, or it's part of my thesis or dissertation, or it's a standalone literature review. Okay, we've got someone not working on one. Still good to get an idea of where you're going to go when you do need to work on one. And yes, you can write in the chat as well, part of a thesis. Awesome. A lot of students will kind of come in needing to do a literature review, but not really like sure of where it fits within the context and if it's part of their paper or if it's the whole paper. So it's always useful to kind of get your mind around that. All right, a lot of theses and dissertations and a few standalone lit reviews. That's awesome. Keep adding, and I'm just going to go on and talk a little bit more about some of the different forms. Okay, so there are many different types of literature reviews, and we'll go over some of the most common. There's lots more, of course, but these are kind of like the big ones, and then there's smaller ones that fit within these categories too. So we have historical literature reviews. These examine research over time to show progression or the evolution of ideas. Then the argumentative literature reviews are intended to establish contrarian viewpoints by selectively positioning literature to refute or support arguments, assumptions, or problems noted in the existing literature. The integrative reviews generate new frameworks or perspectives through a detailed critique and synthesis process. These reviews should have an exhaustive literature search, meaning all the literature on the specific topic should be considered. Thorough integrative reviews follow methodologically sound practices for primary research, including meeting standards for rigor and replication. Theoretical, so we're on this one, theoretical reviews are used to establish what theories exist, how theories are related, and how they've been investigated. They're often used to show inadequacies of current theories for emerging research problems. Then our methodological reviews focus on how research was done, not necessarily the findings. So not what someone says, but how they came to say it. This type of review highlights how researchers draw on wide collections of knowledge and use varied approaches to capture the analysis and analyze data. This helps highlighting disciplinary trends, gaps in the data collection, such as all of them are quantitative or all of them are qualitative, and also ethical issues to be aware of. And then lastly, we have systematic reviews. These have a standardized methodology used to prepare an overview of existing evidence. They're used quite a lot in the health sciences and are gaining traction in social sciences. It requires a clearly formed research question and pre-specified methods to identify and evaluate relevant research. In a systematic review, you carefully document your search, evaluation, and summary. Meta-analyses are an extension of a systematic review process and involve data consolidation steps. So next, with the same link, is what type of literature are you working on? And I think I just need to switch to my next slide. There we go. Okay. And also, if you don't know, you can also say I'm not, which is totally fine. Always just good to get an idea too, so we can be like, okay, everyone's working on systematic reviews. I find I get a lot of questions about them, but they're a tricky one to do, so. And it's also a lot of information to take in, so you might just not be sure yet. But we've got a integrative, a couple theoretical, and a systematic. Okay, awesome. Thanks, everyone. Okay, so now we'll talk about how to prep for a literature review. So we're going to shift over to prepare for and get started with your literature review. Start with articulating your question or problem. What topic are you studying, and what do you know about it, and what do you want to know? Form a research question or a hypothesis. Then begin your literature search. So this is where you're going to find materials relevant to your question or hypothesis and fill information gaps. This will likely be an iterative process. So you'll start with a problem, you'll do some searching, you'll read and review, and then as you learn more, you'll refine your question, and then you'll search again, and that'll kind of continue on. I am going to share a link to our Search Like a Pro course. And I also just did a session on that is in the YouTube links I sent above, because that's the playlist from this session. But that goes a little bit more into detail of developing your search strings. Then you'll get into evaluating the items you find. Is your literature relevant, significant, key to the discourse? Are you missing authors? Check out the literature reviews for the works you have. Are there common authors listed? Do you have those authors in your collection? I like to use the CRAP framework to evaluate these sources. So this goes over currency. Does the date affect the validity of the conclusions? Relevance. Is the paper relevant to your topic and significant in the discussion on your research topic or problem? Accuracy. Are the claims or arguments based on reliable and valid data sources? Are you able to check? How transparent is the methodology, the data collection and analysis process? Authority. Who are the authors? What experience or expertise do they have that is relevant to the discourse? And purpose. Is it objective? What do you think was the intention of writing this? So begin your analysis and interpretation. See if the gaps can be filled as you analyze and interpret. This is where we start to ask ourselves when to stop looking. So how do you know if you've thoroughly reviewed the literature and found all you can at the time? First thing to do is to look for repeating patterns. If the same thing is being said just by different people, then it's likely to demonstrate that the research problem has hit a conceptual dead end. At this point, consider, does your study extend current research? Does it forge a new path, or does it merely add more of the same thing that's already being said? Look at the sources the authors cite. in their works? Do you see the same authors being cited in each paper? This is often an indication that no new ideas have been generated to address the research problem. And last, citation tracking. You can use Scopus, Web of Science, and Google Scholars cited by to see who cited the works you're exploring. If the same authors are being cited again and again, this may indicate no new literature has been written on the topic. And once again, our Search Like a Pro guide that I linked there does go over using cited by sections in various databases, so be sure to check that out. And now we'll jump over to Sarah Jean and the overall structure.
So these are the components of a typical literature review. We have title page, abstract, possibly a preface, introduction, background, methodology, review or results, discussion and or conclusion, and references. And we won't discuss the title page or references section today, but we will focus on the rest, and Joanna will fill in the gaps on methodology for us. So throughout all the sections of your review, you should always keep in mind your research question. Make sure to relate in some clear way to the research question, starting with the abstract and introduction and moving through to all sections of the review. Even all paragraphs should fit in some way. And if you find that you have too much material after writing a first draft, this would be a good question to ask yourself at the end of each section and paragraph, whether it relates strongly enough to your research question. If it doesn't, it could be a signal that it doesn't actually fit in this review. The abstract, as with any paper, is a short summary of the entire review. There are no secrets in the abstract. It actually includes your overall findings and conclusions. And this is one reason that the abstract is written after the review is complete, to fully capture the contents of the review and its conclusions. A reader should be able to read the abstract and understand the overall contents of the review without reading the review itself. And the abstract also often includes keywords used to obtain the literature found. If you find it a more straightforward approach, you can even break your abstract down into short sections like this one does. So for example, you might include objective or purpose, scope, design and methods, results, and recommendations or conclusions. Or you might include a sentence or two for each major section included in the review. Now, even though this looks like bullet points, be sure to write only in full sentences. And you may not need to include an abstract depending on your assignment specifications. For example, APA 7 doesn't require an abstract for student papers, but one might still be required by your instructor, especially at the graduate level. So you might want to check if you're not sure. The preface, which is optional, would be placed on the page after the abstract and would look something like the one you see here. Hart recommends including one if it will give insight into how and why you chose your topic. A preface includes information that you would like to share with the reader, but that doesn't have a direct bearing on the research. For example, it could be a personal statement about the research's relationship to your background. It can also touch on who your intended audience is, as well as the scope and intention of your research. All of this can provide context to your reader so they understand the motivation behind your review. And don't expect to perfect your introduction in a first draft. The purpose of an introduction at the beginning of the writing process is to ensure you understand your own purpose. It's a way for you to set the stage for your writing, not provide a polished introduction for the audience. It's really best to revise it with the audience in mind once you've written the body of your paper. And once the introduction is complete, these are 5 basic things that it should achieve. Announce the topic of your review. So you could do this in a way that grabs the reader's attention and hooks the reader in. State the purpose of your review. The audience should understand what objectives the review will accomplish. This could also identify the gap that you're investigating. Explain the relevance of the topic. The introduction will make clear the significance of the topic so that you can demonstrate why it's worth discussing. You can also establish your credibility here. Through your opening statements, the reader should understand that you have a deep understanding of the topic and the expertise to discuss it in detail. And finally, preview the main points that you'll make in the main body of the text. Demonstrate the structure of the review, for example, what sections it contains, or the main point of each section. And here's the introduction for the article we saw the abstract of earlier. Joanna et al. First announced their topic of geriatric education of undergraduate nurses. Next, they demonstrate the relevance of the topic by explaining the gap that exists in the geriatric nursing curriculum. They establish their credibility throughout, for example, by referencing major studies or other work on the topic, as well as by discussing the topic in a clear manner. They end on their purpose, which is to examine the effectiveness of an education program with a geriatric component. This introduction doesn't directly preview all the main points of the body, but at the end they lay out 3 themes that are identified and expanded upon in the review and discussion, with the literature categorized into those 3 to draw out specific findings. And we'll talk more about how to identify themes later. You can also see these diagrams of the article in the mini course that Joanna and I mentioned earlier. As Garson explains, including a background is useful for showing how the topic has gained significance over time. So imagine the issue you're investigating as developing through time and being responded to by experts in your field. In the background section, you have in a way begun your review of the literature, but you might be focused on foundational texts and foundational research at this point. This includes what Garson calls the historical response of the academic community, along with milestone studies and sources that define the topic, but don't contribute directly to the more specific conversation of your research question. As you move into the review section, you'll be focusing on research that has a direct bearing on your specific topic or question, whereas the background gives an overview of the general research related to the topic, especially through a historical lens. And a background may or may not be required for your particular paper. You can always talk to your instructor or get feedback from a writing coach. You can always check with us at the Right Site. We can brainstorm together what sections you might actually need. Here we see Joanna et al.'s background section. They begin with how the topic has gained and is gaining significance over time by showing the rapid growth of the aging population and the shortfall of nurses that can't keep up. They show the contributions of foundational texts on the topic, referencing the work of numerous commissions, institutes, foundations, and associations. They then detail the milestone studies that perhaps don't speak directly to their specific research question, but that do speak generally to the lack of this component. The authors end by returning to the significance of the research question or gap, by showing why the research is needed given the history of the topic. So just to review these initial sections of the literature review, we've got a short true or false quiz here, and you can put T and F in the chat if you like. So our first one is, you should think of the review as a cohesive whole centered around your research question. Would that be true or false? The review is a cohesive whole centered around your research question. Lots of truths, exactly. Okay, moving on to the next one. The abstract should be written before the review is complete. Would that be true or false? All right, Teresa's leading the falses there. Exactly. The abstract should be written after the review is complete. Although again, you can kind of use it as a brainstorming tool if you like, but of course you'll come back and rewrite it later. The introduction announces the review's topic, states the review's purpose, and explains the topic's relevance. Would that be true or false? Okay. Lots of true, exactly. Those are 3 of the functions of the introduction. And finally, the background uses foundational texts and milestone studies to show how the topic has gained significance over time. Would this be true or false about the background? True. Great. Awesome. Thank you for participating. Now we can move to Joanna and our methods section.
Okay. So in your methods section, you'll want to address what you did, how you did it, and why. You'll want to tell your readers about your intentions, what happened, any changes or shifts that happened, and why they happened. Did you run into any obstacles? What were they? How did it all get resolved, and what did you end up doing? Keep it brief but informative. So you'll start with a plan for the review, then you'll search the studies, you'll sift through and select your appropriate studies, then you'll extract the data from those studies, assess the quality of the studies, combine the data, so that would be where you synthesize or meta-analyze, and then discuss and conclude your overall findings, and then you would disseminate your research. So diligent note-taking is going to be your friend here. This is where you might want to go back and watch our Keeping Organized as You Search webinar, because we go more into journaling your search and that type of thing. But what you want to do is keep track of what you searched, where you searched, what you found or did not find. Consider including reflective pieces as you search, not simply the keywords and the numbers found, but your thoughts as you search and scan the results. For example, if you're searching in Medline and you think to yourself, wait, all those articles keep coming from the same journal, I should check that out. Make sure to write that down. Keep track of those thoughts as they can help you when you're writing up your methods section. If you're doing an integrative review, a systematic review, or a meta-analysis, you'll need to be even more detailed in your note-taking process. For those methods sections, your readers will expect to see a summary of all the steps noted in the list here. So the selection criteria, the search description, the collection and assessment processes, and how you identified the data needed to inform your results. For the selection criteria, we want to know how you decided what studies were included and excluded. So the types of participants, interventions, the measures. The search description needs to be meticulously documented so it can be assessed and also replicated. That's the big thing, is the replication. Full search strategies should be provided with the paper. A full search strategy summary should include all the sources you searched, so databases, websites, anything hand search like journals or conference proceedings, all gray literature sources, any people or organizations you contacted, all dates of the last search for each database, and limiters used. So the period searched, as well as any language or publication status restrictions. And the full search strategies for each database should be included in your appendix. The data collection and analysis should include how studies were selected for inclusion in the review, how study data was extracted from the study reports, and how study data were combined for analysis and synthesis. So you can consider using a flow diagram in your reporting. It can be used to capture the number of studies found, assessed, excluded, and included, and it's also a great way to share with your readers the volume of literature found and considered. For the last part of your methods section, you should address the study quality and bias. Assessments of study quality are linked to the risk of bias, and the Cochrane risk bias tool, which is shown here, is one of the ones that's most often used. The first part of the tool judges the risk of bias based on what was reported in the study, and the second part assigns a risk of bias rating. The ratings are low, high, or unclear risk. Cochrane also has a tool to assess the risk of bias in the risk of bias tool. It's a crucial step, requires rigorous assessment and thorough documentation, as these studies form the basis for your results. All right, and we will go on to Sarah Jean and the review or results.
Awesome. Thanks, Joanna. So through the inclusion of the methodology section that Joanna just detailed, you can really see how the literature review is really a type of research in itself. You're not just reporting what others have found, but are actually conducting your own research to obtain some result. And this is why Aviard suggests that the review section actually be called results. Your review is the result of your research. This is not just a random reporting of accumulated data. You should identify the themes within your research so you can structure your review in a way that presents the ideas that emerged in a logical order. Aviard suggests to begin with the most dominant theme and discuss the following themes thereafter. In the next slides, we'll explore ways that you can determine the themes or topics that you'll organize your review around. And these include questions the literature review can answer, analysis and synthesis, and comparison and contrast. But first, we'll look at Yan et al.'s results section. This shows how you might subdivide the results into themes. In addition to presenting their data in tables, Yan et al. Expanded on categories of significant findings, seen in yellow and italics. These were the 3 themes we saw listed at the end of their introduction. In blue, you can see the explanation of what each category consists of. For example, in 4.4, geriatric knowledge outcome, they give the main point of the section. 3 studies showed significant improvement in post-intervention knowledge scores. Then they go into more detail about each study. This isn't the only way to present information in the review portion, but it can provide a guide. And this figure from Hart shows questions your literature review might answer. This can help you understand what information you might gather and how you might structure it. Not all of these will be relevant to every review, but some of the basics include, from the top left, what are the key sources? This is the very basic starter question. Next, what are the key theories, concepts, and ideas? Within the key sources, what key ideas emerge? What do various sources have in common? What are the main questions and problems that have been addressed to date? Some fundamental questions and problems of the early development of the subject might appear in your background section, but as they become more specific to your own research question, you'll want to record them in your review or results section. Next, how is knowledge on the topic structured and organized? This one is a bit trickier, but ask yourself what types of data you've gathered. Is it subjective or objective, quantitative or qualitative, and so on? You could also determine whether your main topic has been divided into subtopics by previous researchers. What are the topic's origins and definitions? This might be partly addressed in the background section as well, but you might still need to address the origins of the more specific aspects of the question and any keywords or concepts that weren't covered in the background's general historical approach. It's also useful to cover how key terms are defined in the literature. What are the major issues and debates about the topic? Are there any major contrasts in researchers' findings? What are the things they can and can't agree on? What challenges have they faced in conducting their research? And finally, taking all these questions as a whole, how have approaches to these questions increased our understanding and knowledge? Here you might begin your own analysis and highlight a gap. There may be a point of learning that has not yet been identified when considering all these texts together. This is the reason for conducting a literature review. Reading and comparing all of the texts together can provide insight that no one else has realized yet. In fact, as Hart mentions, conducting the literature review can actually help you in this way to narrow your topic for a larger project. And you may be working on that now if you're working on your thesis or dissertation. Now, how to make the literature review your own, how to explain or recast the information you've collected can be confusing when it may seem as though the data simply speaks for itself. It doesn't. It's up to you to analyze and synthesize it as the aim of your review. Hart gives insights into how to do this. First, analysis. At the bottom here. Analysis is the initial action you do to the data you've gathered. To select, you choose what is relevant. To differentiate, you compare the data. To dissect, you examine the data carefully to understand it. And to break it up, you group it into subtopics. In synthesis, synthesis is done on the parts that are discovered through analysis. When you integrate and combine the parts, you start putting them back together according to their relationships with each other. You reorganize them into a different order than they were originally presented. You recast them by putting them into the unique context of your paper. CART provides this worksheet template that can be used to help organize data into different topics before combining and recasting it in your writing. The template is designed for the use of multiple sources at once, and it allows you to group sources by topic and explore their similarities and differences. This in turn gives you a way to structure your review by theme or topic. And there's a link to this template on our handout. This is our next section, the discussion. After the review is complete, your job isn't quite done yet. You usually still have to discuss the findings and present your conclusions. As you've probably seen in many journal articles, the results section is followed by a discussion. Here the authors interpret the results within the context of their research question. In your discussion, you will generally do the following. Interpret the results. Aviard mentions to discuss all aspects of the results. In other words, make sure no part of the data from the results section goes uncovered in the discussion. On the flip side, don't introduce any new information. Here you'll discuss the data differently from in the results, but no new data should appear. All the relevant data should appear in the results section. Develop your argument. Remember, you should always return to your research question and seek to answer it. Emphasize the main findings and their meaning for your argument. How do they help to prove or support your answer to the research question? Critique and evaluate. From an unbiased perspective, critically evaluate the literature's strengths and weaknesses as well as your own. This means also acknowledging your review's limitations. And make recommendations. Based on all the findings together, draw your conclusions about what should be done. In a few slides, we'll look at argumentation patterns that will help you do this in a logical way that relates to your research question. Back to Joanna al. At the beginning of their discussion section, they provide a mini introduction that briefly summarizes the method and purpose of the review, then states their main finding in green, when the data of all the relevant literature is taken into account. Like their results section, Joanna al's discussion is broken down into several subsections, with the headings highlighted in yellow. The first three reflect the three major themes presented in the results. Now this time, instead of focusing solely on the studies, the overall findings are interpreted for their meaning to the author's research question. For example, in 5.2, geriatric attitude outcome, the authors begin by declaring their surprise at the overall attitude score within the studies. Now they're discussing and evaluating the findings within the context of their research. In further headings within their discussion section, you can see the authors discussing the implications and significance of their findings. They evaluate and critique the literature, as well as make recommendations in pink. They're stating what should be done based on their findings. And they also included a separate subsection within their discussion for their review's limitations to ensure that they're being forthright and giving a clear picture of any potential weaknesses to their research. In terms of structuring your discussion section to successfully argue your main idea, there are several possible patterns that you can start from. The most basic structure moves from problem to solution and includes the disadvantages of the problem, the advantages of the solution, and the refutation of possible objections to the proposed solution. This could also be as simple as identifying a gap, then filling a gap. The discussion or conclusion will likely give you the opportunity to focus on the solution and filling of the gap. As you move toward filling the gap, you'll likely cover the disadvantages of nothing being done, the advantages of addressing the gap, and refutation of objections to your proposed method of addressing the gap. You can think of this argument structure as in play throughout your paper, but it's especially important in the discussion section because the discussion focuses in many ways on the recommendations you come to through the course of your research. Here's an adaptation of Hart's argumentation patterns that you can review more closely from the slides that Crystal sent. These patterns include problem awareness, cause and effect, and possible solution or alternative solution. You can see in all three of these patterns how the argument is built by identifying or describing some kind of problem or gap and gradually moving toward addressing or providing a solution for the problem or gap. And the solution comprises your recommendations or conclusions. In order to show why previous solutions are inadequate and previously identified causes are irrelevant, you may engage in criticism and evaluation of the literature you've gathered. For studies that support your own conclusions, you must also take a critical perspective and evaluate their limitations. As you do, remain objective and unbiased to preserve the reliability of your work. Criticism can comprise agreeing or disagreeing with a position and showing with evidence why you agree or disagree. You must then defend your position. So again, give the evidence for the strength of your position while refuting counter-arguments. You may want to recognize the strengths and weaknesses of the literature you've reviewed and are now discussing, and you must address the strengths, weaknesses, and limitations of your own critique and review. Looking more at strengths and weaknesses of the literature, be sure to acknowledge strengths or advantages even where you don't agree with the overall approach or findings. You can still reject the aspects of the research that are flawed, but you should take a balanced approach that avoids categorizing something as all good or all bad. Potential weaknesses to look for can include fallacies, inadequacies, and limitations. Fallacies are misguided or flat-out false beliefs that have been presented as evidence. Inadequacies could include inconsistencies, omissions, or other flaws in the research. Limitations, which often arise from external constraints, are usually recognized by the authors of the research, but it's possible that you might identify other weaknesses that may have had an impact on their conclusions. Your conclusion, which may be part of the discussion or its own section, is your final opportunity to emphasize your main idea, the answer to your research question, and leave an impression on the reader about the significance of your findings and recommendations. As with any conclusion, it's good practice to include the following points as laid out by Garson. A reminder of the research question or problem, why it is significant to solve the problem, and how the research presented plays a role in the solution. This is also a way of saying how your review makes an original contribution to your field through the filling of a gap. All right, to help us review, here's one more quick true or false quiz. So again, feel free to participate in the chat if you like. So our first true or false item, the review or results section should identify themes and present them in a logical order. Would that be true or false? You could put T and F if you like. Damara, true. You're right. Yes, exactly. The review or results section should identify themes and present them in a logical order. All right, thanks everybody. The next one, analysis dissects the data while synthesis recombines it. Would that be true or false? About analysis. Exactly. Analysis dissects the data and synthesis recombines it. Great. All right, moving on. An argument identifies a problem or gap and recommends a solution. Would that be true or false? Seeing just so many T's. True, exactly. And finally, it's important to be subjective and biased while remaining unaware of strengths and weaknesses. Would that be true or false? All right, finally, some falses. Exactly. It's important to be objective and unbiased while remaining aware of strengths and weaknesses. Great. Thanks for participating. And we can go to the next slide, Joanna. And I will just give another little review of our mini course or guide. So at this link, you can check out our interactive exercises that accompany this webinar. The link is there in the chat again. And I think, Joanna, you were going to talk about another free course?
I was just going to show you how you can go about searching for specific methodologies, or if you're wanting to look up articles about, if you're wanting to look up like literature reviews or meta-analyses or that type of thing, that is included in our Search Like a Pro guide. And okay, so why don't you start putting questions into the chat, and then if we have time or no one has questions, then I can go over the methodology searching limiters.
And remember that if you have specific questions about your assignment, you can reach out to the library or the Right Site. Of course, at the Right Site, we can help you with planning your literature review. If you'd like to book an appointment, we take appointment requests by email for planning. So again, I'll put our email address in the chat. And then you do also have the option of getting written feedback on your literature review through our Right Site Dropbox, and I'll put that in the chat as well. But if you're new to literature reviews or you're not really sure how to go about it, then definitely booking a planning appointment by emailing us could be the next step.
I'm not sure what you mean by ideal literature review in English. Oh, and just for our recording, the question is, how would a research differentiate between the ideal literature review in English literature compared to history?
It really more have to do with the type of review that either your class is requiring that you do or that you would like to do based on your research question. What do you want to find out? So, you know, each subject area would lead you to different research questions that then maybe that would help you decide what type of review you want to do. And I think that's probably where the main difference would be.
Yeah, like just because you're doing an English literature review doesn't mean that it has to be historical. Like you could still be doing an argumentative review about English literature. Is that what you're kind of saying, Sarah Jean?
Exactly. Either one, either subject area, you could do any type of review. It really would just depend on what you're trying to find out. So for example, I'm just thinking, trying to think back to my English studying days. You might be trying to, for example, determine like how views about a certain text changed over time. And that would be a historical literature review approach within English literature. But you might also take an argumentative approach by looking at, you know, what does a certain symbol in a text mean? And you have your own idea. And now you're seeing if the literature supports that idea. So really, any of these approaches could work for any subject area. It really just depends on your question, I think. Anything you want to add, Joanna?
No, I think that's great. I was trying to like think of an example as well, and none were coming to me. I actually don't get a lot of English lit questions. So.
Yeah, that's a really interesting question, Ritmanjali. So thank you for that.
So I can jump in there. Usually you're going to look for repeating patterns, consistency in sources, and then you can also look at, basically you want to make sure you have everything and especially like new information or differing information on a topic. One thing I like to do is to look through the reference lists of other literature reviews, and that can kind of give you an idea of like, okay, am I including most of these authors, or do most literature reviews on this topic include authors that I don't have, and like why am I not using them, or why are they not coming up in my searching?
Yeah, and I guess another thing you could think about there, Marcella, is with how many sources are sufficient, or how do you determine you've reviewed the current literature? If you're finding that it's still really massive, and for your project, say it's just like a literature review for coursework, and it's only supposed to be 15 pages versus you're doing the literature review for your dissertation, which is going to be much longer. If you're finding you have too many sources that are relevant, then you probably need to narrow your question, narrow your topic. You might have too broad of a topic, and then that could help you get to a manageable number of sources for a shorter literature review. Hopefully
Yeah,
that helps.
and that can also be a useful point to check in with your supervisor or prof or whoever's working with you on this, because if you are getting too many results, or you have like thousands of articles on that topic, that is where like you do probably need to narrow the topic, as Sarah Jean's saying. I also get a lot of questions where students are like, how many is an appropriate amount? And it's like, it really varies depending on the topic, but that is where like, if you do only want to review 200 articles, then you will probably need to make quite a refined topic search. But that will also come as you start looking through the results that you're getting.
Right.
And,
Like,
oh, go
would you
ahead.
say, Joanna, you know, say 200, that means like going through to decide if you will include or exclude it, correct?
Yeah, totally.
Not that you would necessarily have 200 references in your literature review.
But yeah, students will come to me and ask like, oh, how many articles would be sufficient for a literature review on like ancient Rome? And it's like, there's probably millions of articles, probably billions of
Right.
articles on that. So I can't really say like, once we narrow that down to like, you're going to look at women and Christianity at the start of Christianity in ancient Rome, and then we can get that into a more approachable amount of articles.
Yeah, great example.
Um, and oh, what's considered current? I can respond to that and you can jump in if you disagree or have additional points, Sarah Jean. It really depends on the topic, in my opinion. Like if you're looking at technology and like medical treatments, usually that's going to be like within the last 5 years. Even just looking at like, if we're looking at stuff more recently, like since COVID has affected things, that's like, that was what, 4 years ago was the start of that. Whereas like, if you're looking at an ancient fresca, there might not have been anything new in the last 30 years about it. Another thing to check with your supervisor or someone in your researcher in your field is they'll have a better idea about that going into it, as they'll be a little bit more apprised on the topics around that, the publications around that.
For sure.
I can review integrative reviews. So they generate new frameworks or perspectives through a detailed critique and synthesis process. So these reviews have an exhaustive literature search, meaning all literature on the specific topic should be considered. And then through the integrative review, thorough integrative reviews follow methodologically sound practices for primary research, including meeting standards for rigor and replication. So it's coming up with new ideas from the literature you find. I think that's my understanding of those. Have you experienced these much, Sarah Jean?
I am not very familiar with the different types
Mm-hmm.
of reviews. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I'm definitely kind of new to integrative. I don't think I can add anything to that.
Yeah, if these breakdowns are not included in the, I can't remember if we included them in the course or not, but if they're not, I'll put them in because I think it's useful to be able to go back and refer back to the more information about them. But that link I sent about scoping versus systematic versus rapid reviews I think is really useful because even just looking at the timelines, it's like a rapid review takes a year or, a couple months to a year. So that's more approachable for one course, whereas systematic reviews, and I'm just double checking my timelines here. Systematic reviews are 9 to 18 months, and you usually have a whole team working with you. And scoping reviews are usually more than 12 months. So those aren't just like small things to take on for one course.
Well, those are excellent questions. Thank you so much for bringing those forward.
Yeah, and it was great to have so much interaction too.
Okay, well, thank you very much to our presenters today, Sarah Jean and Joanna. And I will throw, before I'm done here, I will throw the link to register for the 5th and final session for the review, literature review series, which I don't have written down.
I think it's research data management, right?
RDM, yes.
Yeah.
RDM is the last one, yes, and that is taking place next week on October 22nd at 1:00 p.m. So I will throw the link to register for that one in the chat as well. Thank you so much, Sarah Jean and Joanna, for today, and thank you to all of our guests for joining us.
Thanks, Crystal. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks for
Bye,
coming.
everyone.
Bye.
Have a good day. Bye.